The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Tombstone, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882. And Sarah McKenna stood frozen in the dim interior of the Silver Dollar Saloon, unable to believe the words that had just left her brother's mouth as he pushed her forward with trembling, desperate hands. "She's worth a bottle of your best whiskey," Tommy McKenna slurred, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the rows of amber liquid behind the bar. "My sister for a bottle, that's the deal." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as every eye in the saloon turned toward them. The piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys before falling silent. She had known her brother's gambling and drinking had gotten bad since their parents died of cholera the previous winter, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Tommy had lost their small ranch outside town 3 weeks ago in a poker game, and they had been living in a boarding house on credit ever since. But to sell his own sister for whiskey was a depravity she had not thought him capable of reaching. "Tommy, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden hush that had fallen over the room. "You cannot mean this." "Shut your mouth," he snapped, his hand tightening painfully on her arm. "I need a drink, Sarah, I need it bad. The shakes are getting worse, and you have been nothing but a burden since Ma and Pa died anyway." The bartender, a portly man with a handlebar mustache, looked uncomfortable as he glanced between the siblings and the other patrons. "Now see here, Tommy, I cannot be party to something like this. This is your sister, for God's sake." "Then I will take her somewhere else," Tommy said, his voice rising with desperation. "Someone here must be willing to make the trade, a woman for a bottle, that is more than fair." Sarah tried to pull away, but Tommy's grip was like iron despite his intoxication. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She was 21 years old, had helped her parents run their ranch for years, could ride and shoot as well as any man in the territory, and now she was being bartered like a sack of grain because her brother could not control his demons. A chair scraped against the wooden floor near the back of the saloon, and a man stood up from a corner table where he had been sitting alone. Sarah's eyes went to him immediately, drawn by the quiet authority in his movement. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, but there was something different about him compared to the usual rough characters who frequented the saloons in Tombstone. Something in the way he carried himself suggested education and refinement beneath the cowboy exterior. "I will pay it," the man said, his voice calm and steady as he walked toward the bar. His boots made soft thuds against the floorboards, and Sarah noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "1 bottle of your best whiskey for the lady." Tommy's face lit up with pathetic gratitude, but Sarah felt her stomach twist with fresh horror. This could not be happening. This stranger was actually going to pay for her like she was property, like she was something to be bought and owned. The bartender hesitated, looking increasingly distressed. "Mr. Garrett, I do not think—" "Get the bottle, Henry," the man called Garrett interrupted, pulling out a leather wallet from his vest pocket. "The expensive one, the imported stuff you keep under the counter." Henry, the bartender, reluctantly produced a bottle of fine Irish whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light filtering through the dirty windows. Tommy practically lunged for it, but Garrett caught his wrist with surprising speed. "Let go of your sister first," Garrett said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made Tommy immediately release Sarah's arm and step back. Garrett handed over several bills, far more than the whiskey was worth, and Tommy snatched the bottle with shaking hands. For a moment, Sarah thought her brother might say something, might show even a shred of remorse for what he had done, but he simply clutched the bottle to his chest and stumbled toward the door. "Tommy," Sarah called after him, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. "Tommy, please do not do this." Her brother did not even look back. He pushed through the swinging doors and disappeared into the bright sunlight, leaving Sarah alone in a saloon full of strangers with a man who had just purchased her like livestock. Garrett stood motionless for a moment, staring at the bottle of whiskey on the bar. Then, in one smooth motion, he picked it up and smashed it against the polished wood surface. Glass shattered and whiskey splashed across the bar, dripping onto the floor in dark rivulets. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the air. "No one should be sold for whiskey," Garrett said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "Not for whiskey, not for gold, not for anything." He turned to Sarah, and she saw something in his gray eyes that made her breath catch. Anger, yes, but also a deep sadness, as though he understood her humiliation on a level she had not expected. "You are free to go, miss. I bought you from your brother so he could not sell you to someone else, someone who might have had different intentions. You owe me nothing." Sarah stared at him, trying to process what had just happened. The other patrons were beginning to murmur among themselves, and the piano player tentatively started up again. She knew she should thank this stranger and leave, should walk out of this saloon with her head held high and figure out what to do with the shattered pieces of her life. But her legs felt like water, and the reality of her situation was crashing down on her all at once. She had no home, no money, no family who wanted her. The boarding house would turn her out as soon as they realized Tommy was gone, and she had nowhere to go. The few friends she had made in town would not want to associate with her now, not after this scandal spread through Tombstone, which it would do within hours. A woman sold by her brother in a saloon was ruined, no matter what the circumstances. "I have nowhere to go," she heard herself say, the words coming out flat and hollow. Garrett's expression softened. "Do you have any belongings at your boarding house?" "A trunk with some clothes." "A few things that belong to my mother." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the oppressive heat. "Tommy sold everything else." "Come on," Garrett said gently. "Let us get your things and then we can figure out what comes next." Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to tell this stranger that she could take care of herself, but the truth was that she could not. Not right now. Not with her world falling apart around her. So she nodded and followed Garrett out of the Silver Dollar Saloon, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her back as she left. The streets of Tombstone were busy with the usual afternoon traffic. Miners, cowboys, merchants, and gamblers moved along the wooden sidewalks, and Sarah kept her head down as she walked beside Garrett. He did not try to take her arm or touch her in any way, for which she was grateful. They walked in silence for several minutes before Sarah finally found her voice. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Why did you pay for me and then break the bottle?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I had a sister once," he said finally. "She died when I was 17. Fever took her. She was 15, full of life and dreams about the future. Every time I see a woman in trouble, I think about her and what I would have wanted someone to do if she had lived and found herself in a bad situation." He glanced at Sarah, and she saw the old grief in his eyes. "No one deserves what your brother tried to do to you. I could not stand by and let him sell you to someone who might have hurt you." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the wall of shock and humiliation that had surrounded her since Tommy's betrayal. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." "You do not need to thank me," Garrett replied. "Any decent man would have done the same." But Sarah knew that was not true. There had been at least 20 men in that saloon, and only one had stood up to help her. That meant something, whether Garrett wanted to acknowledge it or not. They reached the boarding house, a shabby 2-story building that had seen better days. Mrs. Henderson, the landlady, was sweeping the front steps when they arrived, and her eyes narrowed when she saw Sarah approaching with a strange man. "Miss McKenna," Mrs. Henderson said coldly. "I heard about what happened at the Silver Dollar. I am afraid I cannot have that kind of scandal associated with my establishment. You will need to collect your things and leave immediately." Sarah had expected this, but it still stung. "May I at least get my trunk? Be quick about it," Mrs. Henderson sniffed. And your brother owes me 3 weeks' rent. If you see him, you tell him I will have the sheriff after him." Sarah hurried inside and up the narrow staircase to the small room she had shared with Tommy. His few possessions were already gone, she noticed, which meant he had planned this. He had known he was going to sell her and had packed his things before they went to the saloon. The realization made her feel sick. Her trunk sat at the foot of her narrow bed, and she quickly checked to make sure everything was still inside. Her mother's wedding dress, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, a few changes of clothes, her father's pocket watch, which she had managed to hide from Tommy during his selling spree, a small leather journal where her mother had recorded recipes and household tips. It was not much, but it was all she had left of her family. Garrett appeared in the doorway, and Sarah was struck by how he seemed to fill the small space without overwhelming it. "Is this everything?" he asked, gesturing to the trunk. "Yes," Sarah said. "I can carry it myself." But Garrett was already lifting the trunk with ease, despite his limp. "I have a wagon outside of town," he said. "I was planning to head out today anyway. There is a ranch about 15 miles north of here, the Double R. The owner is a friend of mine, and his wife is always looking for help around the house. If you are interested, I could take you there and introduce you." Sarah followed him down the stairs, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's disapproving glare as they left. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Garrett, very aware of how close they were sitting, how she could smell leather and sage and something else she could not quite identify on him. "I do not even know your full name," Sarah said as Garrett guided the horses out of town. "Cole Garrett," he replied. "I work as a horse breaker and trainer. Been doing it since I was 16, traveling from ranch to ranch, breaking wild horses and teaching them to work with riders. The Double R hired me a few months ago to work with their new stock, but I finished the job early. I was just passing through Tombstone to pick up some supplies before heading to my next job in New Mexico territory." "So you are leaving," Sarah said, trying to ignore the unexpected pang of disappointment she felt. "I was," Cole said carefully. "But I can stay a few extra days. Make sure you get settled at the Double R before I move on." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough road. The desert landscape stretched out around them, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. Sarah had grown up in this harsh country, had learned to love its wild beauty despite its dangers, but now it felt alien and threatening. Everything familiar had been stripped away, and she was adrift in a world that suddenly made no sense. "I should hate him," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. "My brother. I should hate him for what he did, but all I feel is sad. He was not always like this. Before our parents died, he was kind and hardworking. He helped Pa run the ranch, took care of the livestock, never touched alcohol except for special occasions. But after they died, something broke inside him. He started drinking to forget the pain, and then he started gambling to pay for the drinking, and it just spiraled out of control." Cole glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Grief can destroy people if they let it. I saw it happen to my father after my sister died. He just gave up on life, stopped caring about the ranch or me or anything else. It took him years to come back from that dark place, and he was never quite the same afterward." "Did you ever forgive him?" Sarah asked. "Your father for giving up, eventually," Cole said. "I realized that people deal with loss in different ways, and some people are not as strong as others. That does not excuse what they do, but it helps to understand why they do it." He paused, then added, "But what your brother did today was unforgivable, Sarah. Grief might explain his drinking and gambling, but selling his own sister crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. You do not owe him your forgiveness or your understanding." Sarah knew Cole was right, but it still hurt. Tommy was all the family she had left, and now he was gone too, lost to his demons and his desperation. The sun had set by the time they reached the Double R Ranch, and lanterns were being lit in the windows of the main house. It was a sprawling adobe structure with a red tile roof, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Sarah could see horses moving in the pastures, their silhouettes dark against the deepening twilight. A woman emerged from the house as Cole pulled the wagon to a stop. She was in her early 40s, Sarah guessed, with brown hair streaked with gray and a warm, weathered face that spoke of years spent in the sun and wind. "Cole Garrett," the woman called out, genuine pleasure in her voice. "I thought you had left for New Mexico last week." "Change of plans, Ruth," Cole said, climbing down from the wagon and then turning to help Sarah. His hands were gentle but firm on her waist as he lifted her down, and Sarah felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the wagon ride. "This is Sarah McKenna. She needs a place to stay and maybe some work if you have anything available." Ruth's sharp eyes took in Sarah's appearance, and Sarah knew she must look a sight, her hair disheveled and her dress dusty from the road. But Ruth did not ask any probing questions. She simply smiled and held out her hand. "Any friend of Cole's is welcome here," Ruth said warmly. "Come inside, dear. You look like you could use a hot meal and a comfortable bed." The interior of the ranch house was cozy and welcoming, with thick adobe walls that kept out the heat of the day and hand-woven rugs on the tile floors. Ruth led them into a spacious kitchen where a pot of stew bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the savory smell of beef and vegetables. A man looked up from the table where he had been reading a newspaper. He was tall and broad-shouldered with gray hair and a face creased by sun and age. "Cole," he said, standing up to shake hands. "Good to see you again." "Who is this?" "Robert, this is Sarah McKenna," Cole said. "Sarah, this is Robert and Ruth Randall. They own the Double R." Robert's handshake was firm, his eyes kind. "Welcome to our home, Miss McKenna." Ruth busied herself ladling out bowls of stew, and soon they were all seated around the table. Sarah had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite of food hit her stomach. She had not eaten since early morning, and the events of the day had left her drained. "So what brings you to the Double R, Miss McKenna?" Robert asked between bites of stew. "Looking for work," Cole said. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but Cole spoke up before she could answer. "Sarah's brother abandoned her in Tombstone today," he said simply. "Left her with no money and no place to go. I thought she might be able to help Ruth around the house while she figures out her next step." It was a kind way of telling the story, Sarah realized, one that left out the shameful details but conveyed the essential truth. She shot Cole a grateful look, and he gave her a small nod in return. Ruth reached across the table and patted Sarah's hand. "We would be happy to have you here, dear. Lord knows I could use the help. This place is too big for one woman to manage, and my daughter moved to California with her husband last year. We have a spare room upstairs that you can use for as long as you need." "I can cook and clean," Sarah said quickly. "I can sew and mend. I know how to manage a household, and I am not afraid of hard work." "I am sure you are very capable," Ruth said warmly. "We can discuss the details tomorrow. Tonight, you just rest and recover from whatever ordeal you have been through." After dinner, Ruth showed Sarah to a small bedroom on the second floor. It was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but it was clean and comfortable. Sarah's trunk had already been brought up and placed at the foot of the bed. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," Ruth said. "And I will bring you a nightgown and some fresh linens. You just make yourself at home, dear." Left alone, Sarah sank down onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came in great, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her parents, dead and buried in the cemetery outside Tombstone. She cried for her brother, lost to his addictions and his weakness. She cried for herself, for the life she had lost and the uncertain future that stretched ahead. But underneath the grief and fear, she felt a small spark of something else. Gratitude, hope. Because a stranger with kind gray eyes had stepped in when no one else would, and now she was safe in a comfortable house with people who seemed genuinely willing to help her. Eventually, the tears subsided, and Sarah washed her face in the cool water from the pitcher. She changed into the nightgown Ruth had left on the bed and climbed under the covers. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, horses nickering in the corrals, a coyote howling in the distance. The low murmur of voices from the porch below, where she assumed Cole and Robert were talking. She fell asleep thinking about gray eyes and strong hands and a bottle of whiskey smashed on a bar. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. But then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in one of her simple work dresses and made her way downstairs. Ruth was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. "Good morning, dear," she said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Sarah admitted. "Can I help with breakfast?" "I would love that," Ruth said. "There are eggs in the basket by the door and bacon in the cold box. The men will be in from their morning chores soon and they will be hungry." Sarah fell easily into the familiar rhythm of cooking breakfast. She fried bacon and scrambled eggs while Ruth finished the bread dough and set it to rise. They worked well together, and Sarah felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Robert came in first, followed by two ranch hands Sarah had not met the night before. They introduced themselves as Jack and Miguel, both young men in their early 20s who had worked at the Double R for several years. They were polite and friendly, treating Sarah with respect and making no mention of where she had come from or why she was there. Cole arrived last, his hair still damp from washing at the pump. He had changed into fresh clothes, and Sarah noticed details she had missed the day before. The way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders, the small scar on his left cheekbone. The way he smiled at Ruth when she handed him a cup of coffee, genuine and warm and unguarded. "Did you sleep well?" Cole asked Sarah as he took a seat at the table. "I did, thank you," Sarah replied, feeling suddenly shy. In the light of day, with the immediate crisis past, she was acutely aware of how handsome Cole was and how kind he had been to her. She busied herself with serving breakfast, not wanting him to see the flush she could feel creeping up her cheeks. After breakfast, Cole announced that he was going to stay at the Double R for a few more days to help with some training work that Robert had mentioned. Sarah suspected this was not the real reason, that Cole was actually staying to make sure she was truly settled and safe, but she did not say anything. She was secretly glad he would be around a little longer. The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Sarah helped Ruth with the cooking and cleaning, learning the rhythms of the ranch house. She mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden, and even helped Ruth make preserves from the peaches that grew in the small orchard behind the house. Ruth was easy to work with, quick to laugh, and always ready with a story or a piece of advice. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would all gather on the wide front porch. Robert would smoke his pipe and talk about ranch business with the hands. Ruth would work on her needlepoint. And Sarah would find herself sitting next to Cole, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that Cole was 26 years old, that he had grown up on a ranch in Texas, but had been traveling for the past 9 years, unable to settle in one place for long. "I feel restless when I stay put too long," he admitted one night, his voice quiet so the others would not overhear. "Like there is somewhere else I am supposed to be, something else I am supposed to be doing, but I never figure out what it is, so I just keep moving." "That sounds lonely," Sarah said softly. Cole looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "It is," he said, "or at least it has been. Lately, though, I have been thinking maybe it is time to stop running and put down roots somewhere." Sarah wanted to ask if his change of heart had anything to do with her, but she did not dare. It was too soon, too presumptuous. They had only known each other for a few days, but there was something building between them, a connection she could not deny. She caught him watching her when he thought she was not looking. She felt the brush of his hand against hers when they passed each other in the house. She saw the way his face lit up when she came outside to bring him water while he worked with the horses. On the fourth day after Sarah's arrival at the Double R, Cole invited her to come watch him work with a young stallion that Robert had recently acquired. The horse was a beautiful buckskin with a wild spirit, and Cole explained that he had been mistreated by his previous owner and was skittish around people. Sarah stood by the corral fence and watched as Cole slowly approached the horse, speaking in a low, soothing voice. He moved with incredible patience, never rushing, never pushing too hard. When the stallion finally allowed Cole to touch him, running his hands down the sleek neck and shoulders, Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. There was something almost sacred about the moment, about the trust being rebuilt between man and animal. "You are very good at this," Sarah said when Cole finally left the corral and came to stand beside her. "It is just about understanding what they need," Cole said, watching the stallion move around the enclosure. "Most horses that people call wild or mean are just scared and hurting. They have been treated badly, so they do not trust anymore. You have to show them that not everyone will hurt them, that it is safe to be gentle again." Sarah realized he was not just talking about horses. "Is that what you are trying to do with me?" she asked quietly. "Show me it is safe to trust again." Cole turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "I am trying to be your friend, Sarah. Trying to help you see that what your brother did was about his weakness, not your worth. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, and I want you to believe that again." "I am starting to," Sarah admitted, "because of you." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the feelings that had been growing since that first day in the saloon. Cole reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough. "I know this is complicated. I know we have only known each other for a few days and you have been through hell. The last thing I want is to take advantage of you when you are vulnerable." "You are not taking advantage," Sarah said firmly. "I have feelings for you, Cole, real feelings. And I think you feel the same way." "I do," Cole admitted. "God help me, I do. From the moment I saw you standing in that saloon, looking so proud and scared and brave all at once, I felt something shift inside me. I have been drifting for 9 years, Sarah, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections. But with you, I feel like maybe I have found a reason to stop running." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Cole could hear it. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "Now," Cole said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "I would very much like to kiss you if you would allow it." "I would allow it," Sarah whispered. Cole cupped her face in his hands and leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Sarah melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, and Sarah felt something she had not felt since before her parents died. Hope, joy. The sense that her life was not over, that there might be happiness waiting for her after all. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I am not going to New Mexico," he said. "I am going to stay here if Robert will have me on permanently. I want to see where this goes, Sarah. I want to give us a chance." "I want that too," Sarah said, smiling through the tears that were streaming down her cheeks. Happy tears this time, not sad ones. Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened and grew. Cole spoke to Robert about staying on at the Double R as a permanent horse trainer and ranch hand, and Robert agreed immediately. "I was hoping you would decide to stick around," Robert said with a knowing smile. "This place needs a man like you, and Sarah needs someone who will treat her right." Cole courted Sarah properly, with all the old-fashioned formality that she had read about in novels but never experienced. He brought her wildflowers from the desert. He took her on rides around the ranch property, showing her his favorite spots. He sat with her in the evenings and told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. Sarah fell more in love with him every day. She loved his quiet strength, his gentleness with animals and people alike. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as though her words mattered. She loved his dry sense of humor and the way he could always make her laugh even when she was feeling down. But there was still a shadow hanging over them, and Sarah could not fully move forward until she dealt with it. She needed to know what had happened to Tommy, needed closure even if it was painful. One morning in late August, about 2 months after that terrible day in the Silver Dollar Saloon, Sarah asked Cole to take her into Tombstone. "I need to see if anyone knows where my brother went," she explained. "I need to know if he is alive or dead. I cannot spend the rest of my life wondering." Cole understood without her having to explain further. They made the trip into town on a cool morning, and Sarah felt her stomach twist with anxiety as the familiar buildings came into view. What if Tommy was still here? What if he tried to claim some kind of authority over her? She was still his sister, after all, and in the eyes of the law that meant something, but Cole must have sensed her fear because he reached over and took her hand. "I will not let him hurt you again," he said firmly. "I promise you that." They started their inquiries at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Henry, the bartender, looked surprised to see Sarah walk through the doors, but his expression quickly turned sympathetic when she asked about Tommy. "He left town about a week after that business with you," Henry said, wiping down the bar. "Heard he headed south toward Mexico. Got himself into some trouble with a card sharp who accused him of cheating, and he had to run before things got ugly. Cannot say I was sorry to see him go, Miss McKenna. What he did to you was a disgrace." Sarah felt a mix of emotions, relief that Tommy was gone and would not be a threat to her, sadness that he had fallen so far, guilt that she felt relieved instead of concerned about his fate. "Thank you for telling me," Sarah said quietly. They made a few more inquiries around town, but no one had heard anything else about Tommy McKenna. It seemed he had simply disappeared into the vast wilderness of the frontier, another lost soul swallowed up by the harshness of the West. As they prepared to leave Tombstone, Sarah felt Cole's hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," Sarah said, and she realized it was true. "I am sad for him, for what he became and what he threw away. But I am also relieved. He is gone, and I can move forward with my life without looking over my shoulder." "Good," Cole said, pulling her into an embrace right there on the main street, not caring who saw. "Because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Sarah McKenna. I want to marry you if you will have me." Sarah pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise and joy. "Are you proposing to me in the middle of the street in Tombstone?" "I suppose I am," Cole said with a grin. "Not very romantic, is it? I should have waited, done it properly with flowers and a ring," and Sarah cut him off with a kiss. "Yes," she said when they broke apart. "Yes, I will marry you, Cole Garrett. I love you." "I love you too," Cole said, and the pure happiness in his voice made Sarah's heart soar. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Ruth and Robert stood up as witnesses, along with Jack and Miguel. Ruth made Sarah a beautiful dress from cream-colored silk that she had been saving for a special occasion, and Cole wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Sarah could barely breathe when she saw him waiting for her. The local minister performed the ceremony in the garden behind the ranch house, with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. When Cole slipped the simple gold band onto Sarah's finger, she felt the last pieces of her broken heart click back into place. She was no longer the frightened, humiliated woman who had been sold in a saloon. She was Cole Garrett's wife, loved and cherished and valued for who she was. The wedding feast was a joyful affair, with neighbors from surrounding ranches joining in the celebration. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Sarah danced with Cole until her feet hurt, and then they danced some more, neither of them wanting the magical evening to end. Later that night, in the small cabin that Robert and Ruth had given them as a wedding present, Cole carried Sarah over the threshold and set her down gently. The cabin was cozy and perfect, with one large room that served as living space and bedroom and a small kitchen area. Ruth had filled it with little touches, curtains and rugs and a quilt for the bed that she had sewn herself. "Are you happy?" Cole asked, wrapping his arms around Sarah from behind as they stood looking out the window at the starlit sky. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah said, leaning back against him. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything, but instead I found you." Cole turned her around to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You saved me too, Sarah. I was so lost before I met you, just drifting from place to place with no purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build a real life." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, discovering each other slowly and carefully. Sarah had been nervous, uncertain what to expect, but Cole was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and simple joys. Cole continued his work with the horses, earning a reputation throughout the territory as one of the best trainers around. Sarah helped Ruth run the ranch house and started a small business of her own, sewing and mending for neighboring ranches. The money she earned gave her a sense of independence and pride. They built a life together, adding onto their cabin with a second room and a proper porch. Cole taught Sarah more about horses, and she surprised him with how quickly she learned. Soon she was helping him with the training, gentling the skittish ones and teaching them to trust. In the spring of 1884, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Cole, worried that he might not be ready for children so soon, but his reaction banished all her fears. "A baby," he breathed, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Sarah asked, searching his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Cole said, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I could burst. We are going to be a family, Sarah." The pregnancy was difficult at times. The summer heat was oppressive and Sarah struggled with nausea and fatigue. But Cole was attentive and supportive, helping with chores when she was too tired and rubbing her aching back in the evenings. Ruth was a wealth of knowledge and comfort, having gone through 3 pregnancies herself. In November of 1884, on a cold, clear night, Sarah went into labor. Ruth and the local midwife were there to help, while Cole paced outside the cabin, wearing a path in the dirt. The labor was long and hard, lasting nearly 15 hours, but finally, just as dawn was breaking, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Cole came in to meet his son, and Sarah watched through exhausted but happy tears as he carefully took the tiny bundle in his large, work-roughened hands. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, staring down at the baby with wonder. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James Robert Garrett, after Cole's father and Robert Randall. James had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had them both wrapped around his tiny finger. Parenthood was harder than either of them had expected, full of sleepless nights and constant worry. But it was also more rewarding than they could have imagined. Watching James grow and change, seeing his first smile and hearing his first laugh, made all the hard times worthwhile. When James was 6 months old, Sarah received word that Tommy had died in Mexico. The letter came from a missionary priest who had been with her brother at the end. Tommy had been sick with pneumonia, the priest wrote, and in his final days he had expressed deep remorse for what he had done to his sister. He had asked the priest to write to Sarah and tell her that he was sorry, that he hoped she had found happiness despite what he had done. Sarah cried when she read the letter, but the tears were more about closure than grief. She had mourned her brother long ago, mourned the good man he had been before alcohol destroyed him. This was just the final chapter of a sad story. "Are you all right?" Cole asked, reading the letter over her shoulder. "I am," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "I am sad that he suffered, but I am also grateful that he found some peace at the end, and I am grateful that he is truly gone now, that I do not have to worry about him showing up someday and causing trouble." Cole pulled her close, and they stood together in the cabin that had become their home, with their son sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "You have come so far from that day in the saloon," Cole said softly. "You are an amazing woman, Sarah Garrett." "I had a good teacher," Sarah replied, smiling up at him. "You showed me that my worth was not determined by what my brother did. You taught me to trust again, to love again." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. James grew into a lively, curious little boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing signs of inheriting Cole's way with horses. In the spring of 1887, Sarah gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who had their mother's blonde hair and their father's gray eyes. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Robert deeded them a parcel of land next to his own property where they could build a proper house. Cole and Sarah designed it together, a comfortable ranch house with 4 bedrooms and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Sarah's sewing business had grown as well, and she now employed 2 other women from town to help with the orders. The money she earned was put aside for the children's future, for education and opportunities that neither she nor Cole had enjoyed. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Cole would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the desert. Sometimes they talked about the past, about that fateful day in the Silver Dollar Saloon when their lives had intersected in such an unlikely way. But mostly they talked about the future, about their dreams for their children and their life together. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked one evening when James was 7 and the twins were 3. "Do you ever wish you had kept traveling, stayed free instead of settling down with a family?" Cole looked at her in surprise. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment, this life, this family, you. You are everything I never knew I was searching for. I was not free when I was traveling, Sarah. I was lost. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive." "I feel the same way," Sarah said, taking his hand. "I know the way we met was awful, that it started with one of the worst moments of my life, but I would not change it because it brought me to you. You saved me that day, Cole, in more ways than you will ever know." "We saved each other," Cole said, pulling her close. "And we built something beautiful together." As the years continued to pass, their family continued to grow and thrive. James grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of horses and his mother's strong sense of right and wrong. The twins, Emma and Grace, were inseparable and showed early talent for music and art respectively. In 1891, Sarah gave birth to another son whom they named Thomas, after her brother. It was a way of honoring the good man Tommy had been before his demons consumed him, and of acknowledging that even tragedy could lead to something beautiful. The ranch prospered under Cole's management and Sarah's business acumen. They added more land, built better facilities for the horses, and developed a reputation for producing some of the finest trained mounts in the territory. Sarah's sewing business evolved into a general store that served the surrounding community, providing goods and services that people previously had to travel to Tombstone to obtain. Ruth and Robert aged gracefully, eventually passing the official ownership of the Double R to Cole and Sarah, though they remained active in the ranch's operations until their health no longer permitted. They passed away within 6 months of each other in 1895, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and hard work. Their deaths hit Sarah and Cole hard, as they had become like second parents to both of them. But they honored Ruth and Robert's memory by continuing to run the ranch with the same values and integrity that the older couple had modeled. In 1898, when Arizona Territory was still rough and wild but beginning to show signs of the civilization that would eventually come, Sarah and Cole celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Their children, now ranging in age from 5 to 14, organized a surprise party with help from the ranch hands and neighbors. As Sarah looked around at the gathering, at the faces of friends and family, at the beautiful ranch that had become their home, and most of all at Cole, still as handsome and strong as the day she had met him. She felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Cole must have sensed her emotions because he came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I am thinking about how different my life could have been," Sarah said. "If you had not been in that saloon that day, if you had not cared enough to intervene, if you had not smashed that bottle and declared that no one should be sold for whiskey. I am grateful every day that I was there," Cole said. "That I had the chance to meet you, to love you, to build this life with you." James approached them, now a young man of 14 with his father's height and his mother's eyes. "Ma, Pa, we are ready for the cake." Sarah and Cole exchanged a smile and followed their son back to where the party was waiting. As they stood together cutting the cake, surrounded by the family and community they had built, Sarah thought back to that terrified, humiliated woman standing in a saloon in Tombstone, being sold by her brother for a bottle of whiskey. That woman had been broken and lost, but she had also been resilient and brave. She had survived the worst day of her life and had been given a chance at happiness by a cowboy with kind gray eyes who believed that people should not be bought or sold for any price. From those ashes of shame and desperation, Sarah and Cole had built something extraordinary. A love that was deep and true, tested by hardship but never broken. A family that was healthy and happy, grounded in respect and affection. A legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Arizona sky in shades of crimson and gold, Sarah leaned against Cole's shoulder and allowed herself to simply be present in the moment. The past was behind them, with its pain and lessons. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities and promise. But right now, in this perfect moment, she had everything she needed. Cole pressed a kiss to her temple, and Sarah could feel his love as clearly as she could feel the warmth of the setting sun on her face. They had traveled a long, difficult road to reach this place of peace and happiness, but they had traveled it together, and that made all the difference. Years later, when Sarah was an old woman with silver in her hair and grandchildren playing at her feet, she would tell the story of how she and Cole met. She never shied away from the truth, never pretended that their beginning had been anything other than what it was. But she always ended the story the same way. "The worst day of my life led me to the best thing that ever happened to me," she would say, her hand finding Cole's, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "Your grandfather saved me that day, not just from a bad situation, but from losing hope. He showed me that one person's cruelty does not define your worth, and that love can bloom even in the darkest circumstances. He paid a bottle of whiskey for me and then broke it on the bar, and in doing so, he broke the chains that bound me to shame and fear. He set me free, and then he chose to stay by my side for the rest of our lives. And that, my dears, is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." The grandchildren would listen wide-eyed to the story, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just sitting in awed silence. And Cole, still strong despite his years, still devoted despite the passage of time, would smile at Sarah with the same love that had filled his eyes on that long-ago day in Tombstone. Their love story had started in the most unlikely of ways, born from tragedy and desperation. But it had grown into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and commitment. From a single act of kindness in a dusty saloon had come a lifetime of happiness, a family that stretched across generations, and a love that would never fade. The cowboy had paid the price and broken the bottle, declaring that no person should be sold for whiskey. And in doing so, he had found his own salvation in the woman he saved, and together they had built a life that was richer than gold and more precious than anything money could buy.